Hey, Ian.
Hi,
Hello.
good morning.
Haven't seen you in a moment.
Yes.
Give me just one moment. I'm doing the stream thing. Key. Okay. Nice. That will be here. Okay. Where's Gene? Note that this is not actually streaming yet. Hey, Eugene.
Hello. All right, we're gonna go live in just 1 minute and we'll start. And we're good to go. One moment. Very well. לא, זה על המרקטינג קלאוד, זה לא לזה. אבל זה לא יעזור, אתה מדבר על זה אחר כך. Okay. Best of luck, folks.
Thank you. I've actually occupied my manager's office for this so that we should get a bit less interference.
Nice. Okay, off we go. So hello to everyone joining us. My name is Tom. I run developer relations here at LightRun. And today we'll have a webinar about cost optimization directly as it relates to engineers. I had the pleasure of having Ian Zhao from Meta here and Eugene Aronovich from Goldman Sachs, who will introduce themselves in just 1 minute. But before that, let's wait maybe 2 minutes just to make sure everyone can come in comfortably, and I will reply back. I will start the webinar once everybody joins peacefully. For everybody joining, note that the webinar will be recorded and is streamed currently on LinkedIn Live on the LightRun page on LinkedIn. You can see it there. And in addition, if you want to get a link to the recording, you can just reply to the email for the invitation that you got, or you can message me directly at tomg@lightrun.com if for some reason you don't get a recording, an email with a recording later on. So just wait 1 or 2 more minutes and then we can start. I'll drink from my comfy glass now. Okie dokie. Looks like people are starting to come in, which is good. Yeah, let's wait a bit more. Okay, so to everyone who's joining us now, my name is Tom Granard. I run developer relations here at Lightrun. This is a webinar for cost optimization for engineers. We will be talking about various cost optimization measures we can take at our organizations, and specifically how it relates to applying the principles, the ideas, the theories, and the practice to our engineering teams. I have with me Yin Zhao from Meta and Eugene Aranovich from Goldman Sachs. And I think we can start. It's enough time to wait. To everyone who's joining us now, there's a Q&A button right at the bottom though that says, unsurprisingly, Q&A. If you have a question you want to ask during the webinar, because everyone is muted except for us, then you can ask it there. Then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session where we as a team will answer all the questions. So yeah, the way this webinar is going to work is pretty simple. Everyone here will get to hear both Yin and Eugene talk about various questions, which I will present to the panel. We're going to start with a little bit of an introduction round. Everybody says a little bit about themselves. Then after the introduction round, we will do a series of Q&A questions between 8 and 11, depends on how much we're going to make it in this webinar. And then at the end, maybe last 5 or 10 minutes, we'll do Q&A depending on how many questions we get. A couple of comments. This webinar is recorded and will be sent to you at the end of the webinar. If you have not received a recording, you can message me directly at tomg, T-O-M-G, at lightrun.com. That's Lightrun. No, this is Lightrun, lightrun.com. And we will be also streaming this webinar live on LinkedIn. So if you go to the Lightrun page on LinkedIn, so that's linkedin.com/in/Lightrun, you will be able to see the webinar live, even if you are not, if you want to share the link to somebody who didn't register during the webinar or so forth. Okay then, so as I mentioned, my name is Tom and I run developer relations for Lightrun, a developer observability platform. Let's do a round of introduction. So Yin, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I'm Yin Xiao. I'm currently a manager supporting the cross-platform developer experience team in Meta. In addition to that, I also spend 10% of my time running an incident management program in Meta, covering the core infrastructures developers, around 305 developers that cover under my incident management program. For me personally, in my career life, I switched the roles and domain a couple times, and I embraced the life that I can get the opportunity of learning different things. So I've been working as IC for 7 years, and then manager for 2 years, and go back to IC for 3 years, and then now back to the manager role. And I've been working, I have experience in data processing, privacy, and system reliability, and now focus in a team of supporting the developer experience.
Thank you very much, Yin. Eugene, please give us an intro.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Eugene Aranovich. I have been working in Goldman Sachs for almost 18 years now, since 2005. Have changed multiple roles over the course of my career. For the past 2.5 years, I've been really working, as a lead of QA. It's an area of, I work in private wealth management, which is an area of Goldman Sachs, business that deals with managing assets of high net worth individuals. We maintain a web portal that's used by our client. We maintain a mobile app that is used by our clients. And really sort of my role and the role of my team is to make sure that as part of QA, that the software that is released to production is well tested. And so for this webinar, just keep in mind, yeah, I'll be sort of addressing these questions probably, as from the QA point of view.
Which is exactly why we brought you, Eugene. So as a little bit of a change to our previous cost optimization webinars, this will be our 4th or 3rd, I believe, webinar in the cost optimization series. We wanted to spice things up a bit. And so we'll have a debate between an engineering manager and a QA manager from the two sides of the gap, if you will. And I think we will make for a very interesting discussion due to the similarities on the one hand, but to the differences in both processes. Now, keep in mind that specifically FinOps and cost optimization as a whole in organization is pretty much widely divided. It's really very distributed. Some organizations focus more on the cost optimization on the engineering side of things. For some organizations, it's more on the QA side of things. In some organizations, on the DevOps or operations side of things. And we're trying to touch on as many different verticals as we can, or rather ways of work as we can during this webinar series. Okay, so I think we can just get started. As a side note, our lovely participants have reviewed and entered those questions in advance, just to make sure that the answers are of the most interest to everyone in the room. I do want to mention regarding the Q&A that I said that you mentioned before, if you have a question that relates specifically to a question they have entered during the panel, I am always looking at the Q&A so I can try and insert it during the discussion. So if you're doing something that you don't really want to wait, it's part of the group, feel free to ask it in the Q&A and ask for me to ask them directly. If it will be appropriate, I will do so. All right, so getting started. So there's a FinOps Foundation currently who's in charge of prioritizing and promoting the FinOps concept in the world. And they ran a big survey amongst engineers and engineering leaders. And in that survey, 30% of the respondents stated that the biggest challenge for them is to get engineers to take action on cost optimization. So what's your current challenge with FinOps adoption and maturity in your own organizations or in the organizations you've worked with in the past? I think, Ian, you can start with this one.
Sure. Yes, I agree with that. It's quite challenging to push the engineers to take actions. And I will answer the question by drilling deeper into that angle of what I'm seeing in my current org. So for us, in the scale of Meta's, this company, the biggest challenge of pushing them into taking action is we don't have a really good way to measure the cost. And we are a company with open cultures, and we can not only see the codes not owned by our team, and we can modify any codes that are owned by our team. That's the culture of the company. And because of this open culture, we also have a lot of smart engineers in the company. So they can make any changes in our infrastructure at any time, even they are not in the infrastructure teams. So take CI as example, a lot of engineers, they can just create the CI jobs and push it into the CI systems. And in the job, they have the freedom and intelligence to do any kinds of things of what they do. And we don't have a really good measure of like controlling what are these jobs, how much resources they're taking, and whether they make sense to enter the systems or not. Because of that, so it makes it hard to figure out the responsibility of who is responsible for how much cost of that, which is also like that weight of ownership and lack of the consistent measurements will make it difficult to push the specific owners, whether it's my team that maintaining CI from the developer experiment perspective, or whether it's the CI job owner's perspective should be responsible of taking action for the cost management in the system. So, and I think in terms of maturity, if we think about the maturity model that with crawl, walk, run that model, I think we are currently in a really early stage, somewhere between crawl and walk, and we have a lot of opportunity to improve.
That's an excellent response, very thorough. Thank you, Ian. Eugene, maybe give us the kind of the agenda or the direction of the team in the company that's literally responsible for maintaining quality. So I think from your perspective, it's a bit of a different answer, but go ahead.
No, because if you think about it, the developers, the way they produce value is writing new code, right? So, and of course, when you write new code, the inevitable stage that comes in is testing that code, right? So, so what we try to do is we try to really, give as much time to the developers so they can write code, and we as an organization spend as little time as possible testing it, right? Because if you think about it, right, if your regression runs for I don't know, for like maybe 3 days or 4 days, right? And if you actually reduce that time by even a factor of a day, if your organization has 100 developers, then it's 1 day times 100 of just productivity of coming up with something valuable, right? So how do we do it? Like, our biggest challenge is really coming up with a set of testing maturity like standards. Getting everybody to follow them, right? And sort of, and then sort of policing it, making sure that nobody falls below those standards, right? So as an organization, that's how we control costs and actually try to steer the productivity time into the most sort of profitable window, right? So and of course, at the same time, just making sure that our reputation doesn't suffer, right? That whatever we test for, whether it's visual testing, whether it's performance testing, right? Our software is sort of top notch. So with that, that's sort of how we go.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the challenges that that we do have that I want to highlight is it just maintaining a development environment. Right. So like I would say that we've done, over the past several years, we've done a pretty good job in sort of uplifting our QA environment. But in our organization, we don't have the type of development environment that would be ideal. Right. So a lot of times what we struggle with is that, developers don't have the ability to, to properly integrate, don't have the capability to sort of do a multifaceted integration testing. And so QA team sort of ends up picking up some of that slack, and yeah, I think that tends to drag out our development cycles.
Excellent, and I think especially in organizations such as Meta and Goldman Sachs, where product quality is not only of the utmost importance, but those compliance and appearances and PR to consider, then when you look at the cost optimization standards that you want to enforce inside your organization, it's also very important to maintain image. So even if you cut costs on a specific thing, it can't never make it to the final product. The customer can never be aware that you've cut costs on a specific thing. The product quality must be persistent. Moving on. Within your own organization, or again, organizations in the past that you've worked for, let us know what's working well and what's not when trying to drive awareness and accountability around cost optimization. So what programs, what efforts, what discussions did you do inside the company to kind of prioritize this concept of cost optimization? And Eugene, I think we'll start with you this time around.
So I'll start with what doesn't work, and that is pointing fingers, right? So especially in in organizations such as ours, look, I would love nothing more than for my job not to exist, right, and to go off to do something else, right? But unfortunately, bugs will show up, right? Incidents will happen, right? Something is not going to work. Something, something is going to make its way to production, and things will happen, right? So the first thing not to do is not to point fingers, right? So we are, always maintain sort of this sort of team, sense of teamwork, right? And really what works well is, the practice of postmortems that we practice, right? Every time an incident happens, right? What do I ask myself, right? I ask myself, well, how did this defect make its way past of all of our safety mechanisms, right? We didn't catch it in integration testing, we didn't catch it in QA testing, we didn't catch it in regression. Like what can we do? What can we do better, right? And we work very closely with the developers, right, to put in controls, to cover testing, to change our practices during these postmortem sessions following every single incident, right? We properly track all the follow-up items, and we make sure each one is executed.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yin?
Yeah, totally agree with what Eugene just talked about. I also want to mention that, like, as I said, I ran a large incident management program in Meta. And for incident management side, yeah, we really emphasize the culture of no blaming in every single steps in the incidents, from how we detect that, how we mitigate it, and then how we do all this retro to identify the follow-ups. And that also ties to what I'm going to discuss as what works well in us is in incident management, we recognize the people who reports all these incidents and how they handle that, and then how they do all the follow-ups. And I think recognition is a big piece that works very well in my environment. I actually see it working well in both my previous company and Meta. And the various kinds of recognition can come into the picture. It can be as formal as we recognize all the achievement in a performance review. It can also be as small as, hey, just in a regular team meetings, in my one-on-one chat with any individual contributors, I show them my appreciation and recognition of all your contribution in the FinOps practice adoption. And I also personally do one thing is I push the leadership in my org really hard, like for those directors in Meta, that I say, I can help to get all this FinOps achievements from the different teams. And then can you help to publish and then show your wide recognitions publicly to the engineers, because that would be really good way to motivate the engineers keep going on this particular path.
So I really think that trying to make the people work the system in the regards to FinOps and regarding to cost optimization is really difficult. It's not something that's trivial to do. And also specifically like people who are lower on the totem pole, engineers and individual contributors who are not always exposed to those metrics, have a difficult time understanding the cost implications of what they do. So Eugene, your comments about trying to kind of increase awareness and accountability for cost.
Well, look, if anything, my time in QA, because I was a developer before, my time in QA, made me paranoid, right? Because I always think that developers are looking for creative ways to break their code, right? So look, but at the same time, right? Look, I'm a proponent of, draconian measures, when it comes to code quality control, right? Making sure, we have proper code reviews, making sure that testing is comprehensive as possible, right? So what I always tell is, look, people can always ask us to run our regression as fast as possible, but in the end, I'm going to say, look, I, make no commitments to any users, make no commitments to the business really to release our software, unless it's tested, right? So if you need a week to work on a defect, go ahead and work on it, right? I'm just not going to not going to approve it until it satisfies the standards, right? So that's it's in the end it's working to benefit the entire organization, both developers and QA, because it will make our job easier, hopefully eliminate it in the future, but right. But yeah, it's in the end it works so well with everyone.
Great, thank you, Eugene. Moving on to a more difficult question. So we talked about driving awareness and accountability, which is kind of the pre and post process of actually doing the work, right? So either you are aware of the problem and trying to fix it, or you are actually held accountable for it and then you're forced to fix it. But there's also the measure of actually adopting the practices. So going from no practice or like the wrong practices or practices that don't work to actually having adoption of FinOps as a methodology inside the organization. So cost optimization becoming an actual priority and something you prioritize over other things. So do you have a recommendation around FinOps adoption that work for you well within your group? And I'll kind of clarify that. So again, it's not about making people more accountable or more aware. It's about getting them to actually do the thing that you want them to do regarding cost optimization. Ian, why don't you start?
Yeah, to get them into do the thing, we need to get these things into the roadmap, into the team's vision. And my answer could be very meta specific. So Meta, it's famous for a bottom-up culture where it's the individual contributors drive the roadmaps and the visions for the team. It's not a top-down line. As a manager, I tell my engineers what they should do. And it could create a chaos of, hey, like different people, because there's so many individual contributors, smart people, they have different ideas. And then it's hard to get to centralized theme. And I think the leadership did a good job here every year. Like this year, Mark Zuckerberg called out 2023 is the year of efficiency. And then we know that's the priority for the company. And as the leadership calls our priority, it helps the IC to drive the roadmaps, drive the consensus on, hey, here is the priority that we need to focus on, which is efficiency. And that can help the IC develop the roadmap and the project plan for the whole year or for the half that is specifically around FinOps. And that's where we can push the ICs into like working on the FinOps adoption.
Excellent. Eugene, your comments?
Right. So recommendation first and foremost from my end is coming up with a set of standards like cookie cutter solutions, right? That sort of make for a repeatable process. Like for example, what worked well in terms of adoption is SDLC life cycles, right? So like we had created sort of like this Bible that of all the things that you need to do to really do the QA sort of part on delivering a story for the users, for the product team, right? So this is, this is when you start grooming the story. These are the things you need to do, right? So when you're actually writing the test cases, these are the things you need to do. When you're actually executing, these are the things you need to do, and so on, all the way up until it goes to the pilot and production. Like sort of this cookie cutter sort of approach is something that we now we have started applying to every single story we get. And I would say that worked as well. The other thing I would say for adoption is audit trail, right? So like in QA, it's extremely important for us to maintain a proper record of all of the decisions, all the conversations that take, right? My team who's on this call, we can tell you, right? The first thing I tell them is make sure that there's a comment in the ticket, right? Make sure. So audit trail is super important, understanding, especially going back to what we said before about postmortems, right? If you maintain a proper audit trail, it becomes much easier to pinpoint the starting point of when the problem actually originated, and then sort of makes it easier to fix.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much, Eugene. Moving on to the next question, kind of taking it more down, lower to the IC level. So do you have visibility into cloud spending as an organization? And specifically, what would be the usual breakdown from highest to lowest? Anything that has an opportunity for optimization. To clarify why I'm saying this is more of an IC question. So I'm asking, when you have visibility kind of from the top, you're trying to figure out how users are using the resources at your disposal. So if an IC is spinning up machines for doing CI or for QA or for actually for production, like a DevOps engineer, those would be different consideration, different cost buckets, quote unquote, that would be allocated accordingly. Eugene, from your end on the QA things, how does that whole thing looks like?
I mean, I can tell you that over the years, and again, I sound like an old man. Well, back in my day,
in the good old times,
like the good old times when you had to go to Dell and you had to buy a server and you put it on a rack, and then that would be your server, right? That was difficult, right? I remember looking at that invoicing process, getting like, I don't know, 10, 20 signatures from my managers, getting the server allocated just because you wanted like an extra server in the dev environment. That was difficult, right? And over the years, as we started adopting the cloud, I definitely, it became much more sort of apparent that the provisioning resources in cloud has become much more streamlined, right? I definitely don't see the budgetary constraints that I used to see, in the past. I definitely don't see them now, right? So like we had, we like, as part of QA engineering, we actually do produce a lot of software. We built out platforms to automate our testing, right? And so what we built out a brand new Selenium grid, right? We provisioned 20 Windows servers, right? We spun up we installed the Selenium servers, Chrome browsers on those servers, and it takes maybe, I don't know, 3-4 days to get the whole thing set up. Very minimal approvals that were required for that. Just this 2 weeks ago, we realized we need one more grid to do additional testing, right? Again, over the course of the weekend, by the time it was done, it was a bit of a fire drill, but by the time the weekend was over, we had a brand new Selenium grid, right? So yeah, definitely working in cloud is much cheaper than working on bare metal servers, like actual physical servers assigned to your team. And yeah, it's, Goldman has made great strides in sort of developer productivity tools that we have for provisioning servers, right? And yeah, it made my job a lot easier.
Sorry. Thank you for that answer, Eugene. Moving on, just to be mindful of time, is there anything specific to your organization vertical that makes things more difficult or easier around FinOps adoption? I'm going to clarify the question. So we have two people here from very different industries. So Meta is a social media, virtual reality, messaging, a lot of things conglomerate. Goldman Sachs is primarily a financial institution, a very large financial institution with various products inside the financial ecosystem. So completely different verticals. They do very different things. And I want to ask: is it easier or harder inside the kind of your vertical? And I think we'll start with Yin this time around.
Yes. To answer this question, I think I need to provide some context of how we organize the verticals and some internal structures in Meta. And we have product layers like IGs, Facebooks, Messengers, and WhatsApps, and MRLs, probably considered as a product. And then, so I am in an infra team, which is at the bottom stack or the tech stack in the company. So my team is not, actually my org, the whole developer experience org is not specific to any products. We are so bottom that all our solutions like work for all the product verticals. And then so Meta has such a scale that each product usually will have their own product specific developer experience team to improve their own products by solve the product specific tech stack problem in terms of the developer experience workflow. So with this context in mind, I would like to address the question from how the organization structure that in my current org makes my life easier or more difficult. And inside of the what we call core developer experience org here, and we structure the developer workflows by platforms, by device platforms. So basically, iOS, Android have their own workflows, web tier have their own workflow, backend services have their own workflow, RL, Reality Lab has their own workflows, and my team is called cross-platform developer experience, which means my team supports whenever all these workflow intersects, which is a super complicated domain. And so, and then the different workflows, they have the different challenges. Like for web and backend services, the typical problem is the scale of the developers and the scale of the libraries is too high. And they are like constantly fighting with the scale of the POMO that they need to, the code gen that they need to drop, the build time that they need to struggle with, like how big the binary it is for the different apps. And for mobile, the biggest challenge would be reliability, not the scale of their apps. So when it comes to the different teams have the different challenges, and as a cross-platform, the biggest challenge for cross-platform is like, it's in terms of this organization structure is it makes it hard to align the priorities and what we should focus on every time that I need to partner with all these teams. So I hope that give you a good insight of how the organizational vertical that affects our daily life.
It really does. Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing a little bit of the culture around how things work over at Meta, which is very interesting in and of itself. And I think, if you don't mind me spending some time myself too, that the entire notion of creating a cost optimization first culture, or at least the cost optimization aware culture, is not something you see in manager handbooks. So you would get as a manager the responsibility for the cost and the resources consumed in your organization. But specifically in engineering teams, in software engineering teams, and especially in the era of the cloud, the actual individual contributors on the other end of the scale have a lot of weight as to what is being used. That's not, for example, a plumber or an electrician taking a bunch more things from the storage while they're working on site. That's an engineer spinning up $1,000 a day machine that might cost at the end of the month $30,000 to the organization with the click of a button. So I think that the scale, as we enter kind of a cloud native area, the scale of what an individual contributor can do is amazing. Now, we're a developer observability platform. We are a product geared towards developers. And we have the utmost agenda to promote developers having more and more power to do more and more things, right? That's the core of the product. But you do have to be mindful of the fact that with great power, as Spider-Man says, as actually, I think the uncle of Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility. You give an engineer the capability to spin up a machine that's worth $1,000 a day. You also have to give them the responsibility to take it off once it's not used anymore. And that's, I think, kind of the core of the whole problem here. Great power, great responsibility, and sometimes the responsibility is not kind of aligned back into the platform. So, not to take too much of a time for myself, I am not the center here, you are. Moving on to the next question. So, let's talk a little bit about predictions. So coming from organizations that have at least some cost optimization measures, and in both of your cases, actually, it's not just some cost optimization measures, it's methodologies and ideas and thoughts around this topic. What are your predictions for 2023 around cost optimization initiatives shifting left towards engineering. So let me explain the concept of shift left, although there's a question in the Q&A there, which is excellent. Let me kind of clarify the question. So shift left is the idea of something moving towards developers in the software development lifecycle. So there's two little circles in the software development lifecycle. The right-hand side is more about operation. The left-hand side is more about development. And the question is, what are your predictions regarding cost optimization initiatives going towards engineers? So where do you think the world is going? Is it going towards engineers? Is it not going towards engineers? Eugene, let's start with you.
I think I'm not sure I see that there's going to be more sort of resources shifting towards engineering, because the way at least our organization operates, right? So, we work with a product team that comes up with specific product idea. They start a conversation with the technology, and it really is well, how many resources do you need to come up with this, right? So, and we're talking about developer time, we're talking about server time. They need to provision new servers, they need to open whatever, punch holes in the firewall, right? It's really about that, right? So it's always about the tell us what you need. This is to get this done, to get this new page created, and this is what you'll receive. I think that's a process that worked well for us. I don't see us changing that anytime soon, right? So and then as a QA person, right, it's always about, okay, well, how many resources in QA you need for that, right? And again, my sort of mantra there is that for every 4 developers, you need the one QA resource, right? I don't see that changing anytime either, right? So my conversation is, look, somebody comes to us and say, okay, well, maybe you need less resources. I said, well, probably, but then you may expect more incidents and more bugs to be found in production as a result of that. That's sort of, I don't see us shifting away from that sort of view on cost optimization.
Thank you, Eugene. It's always interesting to hear kind of, again, the other side of the fence. We really are developer focused in this webinar, and it's a pleasure having you here talking more from the kind of QA perspective. Yen, your predictions for 2023 around cost optimization initiatives shifting left.
I think at first I want to say, I think shifting this left, the cost optimization to the engineering side, I personally think it's a really good thing. And what I see in 2023 is like we should do harder to do that. And why I say it's a good thing, because the developers are often like in the development cycle, which are like early before a feature is launched or before a product is launched. And then shifting all this cost optimization conversation to engineering means actually shifting all these considerations early. And they can help us to prevent for unexpected like cost spent later in the stage. I think it's a better result than rather than we don't consider the cost optimization so early in the engineering side and then figure it afterwards after the product or the feature is launched. So that's my take of that. And I think so. When we develop a feature, it's an iterative process on how to optimize the cost. It's not always that it's given a budget from the products or the leadership take. So like here is how much we could spend for the development cycle. And I think the developers can also have a voice of saying that, yes, with this cost, we can only, let's say, meet 50% of the reliability goal. If we want to meet 80% of the reliability goal, we need to increase the cost there. Basically, I can also see by shifting this conversation left to the engineering side, it creates the opportunity for engineering and the business unit on how to iterate through the discussion of cost optimization, and then it can drive to a really well-aligned goal, which is also good for the company.
Interesting. And I think that one of the main things that maybe people miss here is that this is not a technical discussion. This is a managerial discussion. So this is not about getting the tools in place and not even getting the practices in place. It's more about getting the people aligned to this whole idea. And I think the recurring theme in this, kind of to double tap on what we talked about before in these sessions, a lot of the recurring theme is around getting visibility to people, getting people to understand that there even is a problem. Because when you're writing a bit of code and then it goes through CI, there's no test saying this costs too much. That's not something that every CI team has. Some of the more advanced ones do, but it's not like common practice. It's not like tests failing, which you will definitely see a red flag in CI. You want to conceptually think about cost optimization as another thing that you test and check and validate and work with in your organization. Speaking of CI/CD, let's talk a little bit about the practices there. So do you see an opportunity within the CI/CD practices to embed automated cost-saving processes and tools? So I'm talking about visibility, log optimization, so logging cost optimization, right sizing, anything that has to do with reviewing the existing thing that is going to move into production and trying to predict or rather optimize in advance for the cost thereof. Eugene, what do you think about that from the CI/CD perspective?
Right. So look, my team is a big user of CI/CD. Again, Goldman has made a lot of progress in onboarding CI/CD, specifically the pipelines that build our code, right? So and QA team has taken that and used it as really a platform to embed the automated testing as part of that pipeline, meaning that we will not release the code, right? Because the pipeline is the automated test will fail, whatever. Either specific test or a threshold of test, if they will fail, we will not release the code. And sort of we will ensure that, again, looking at cost optimization, we're not going to release the bugs and we'll catch them early on. And, CI/CD definitely offers a way to, to automate, right? And not have, not even having somebody sitting there, waiting to click a button to run the test, right? It just happens, right? The developers, click commit, and then in the suite of the automated test runs. That's so for us, CI/CD honestly was really beneficial.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Eugene. Yin, on your end, I do want to kind of double down on the CI/CD stuff, but also I think you had some comments about kind of catching things earlier in the process generally, right? Not just on the CI/CD front. So go ahead and please.
Yes, I will answer this question from a different angle from Eugene's. Context for that, my team, CI is an area that a developer experienced here will support here. So my team has a lot of experience in CI, and CD is very similar, though it's not exactly my team's scope. And I'm seeing plenty of opportunity that we can do better in this area in terms of cost optimizations. And as I mentioned that my team is in the bottom of the stack, so we could see a lot, we need to handle like a lot of code changes that is in the core libraries, which those libraries like MSys and ARSYS, they are library that help to improve the messaging and video and audio calling experience in Meta, and then they get used in all the apps and all the platforms. And we also see we also need to help the developers who write PyTorch code. It's a machine learning framework that can use everywhere in Reality Labs domain. So for those developers, and because they're so bottom at the stack, and whenever they make the code change, they can launch tens of thousands of CI jobs in our system, which could be a really interesting experience. Is it necessary to launch so many CI jobs? The answer is high chance is no. And then what is good to launch, what is not good to launch? Because how many jobs to launch here affects the developer experience. It affects how much cost, how much capacity we need to take from the systems. And it also affects the reliability of the CI systems. And so this is actually one of the projects that my team is working on currently. It is we take all these CI jobs and then we find a way to enforce that we only launch a limited amount of CI job during the code change time, the code review time, which we use that method to help to reduce the frequency of the CI job that we need to run to make sure we only launch a high quality of the jobs when it's necessary. And then we push some lower quality, lower critical the less critical CI jobs to a less frequent schedule. For example, like to have them to run in continuous system instead of the CI and CD pipeline. So this is just one concrete example, but based on what I see, what I try to say is with the scale of the code change and the complexity in the CI system, I do see plenty of opportunity that where we can do better in improving the logging and surfacing the metrics to the CI job owners that, hey, what CI jobs are worth to run, what are not worth to run. And I see the same principle can be applied in CD domain too.
Thank you very much, Ian, for the thorough answer. Let's move on to a more kind of general architectural question. So when building cost-efficient software, generally speaking, you're trying to balance three things. So that's cost, speed, and quality. And this kind of trifecta is often known as the FinOps triangle. So there's a problem, there's a cost optimization problem, and there's also the problem of quality of the software, and also the problem of getting the software out there. And you want to balance all of them to make sure that you never end up as either like a product of low quality, as a product that's way too expensive to run, and as a company as a whole that's not innovative, meaning it doesn't publish more software, more stuff over time as quickly as possible. So what's your opinion, or recommendations rather, to properly balance between the three: cost, speed, quality, and like cost-aware software engineering organizations? Eugene, let's start with you.
So to recommend there is, again, for looking at this from QA point of view, is to establish sort of proper benchmarks for your software, right? If you're saying if you want your software to be quick, right, just say, okay, you know, this whatever REST service, the endpoint should run this fast, right? If you run it in 10 threads, it should run that fast, right? If you know, same thing goes for benchmark, you know, this is the test code coverage that should be in place, right? This is the amount of these are the regression tests. These are the regression tests that should be part of your suite, right? And you should review those regression tests every X months to see if maybe something was missing, and maybe something, you know, that needs to be added, right? Something that was missed. So really establishing those benchmarks applied to the code, that's actually going to sort of provide, at least from the quality point of view, I'll be able to say that, you know, this code meets the quality standard, right? And, you know, if that you know, allows us to, you know, save somewhere else, then, you know, so be it.
Amazing, thank you, Eugene. Ian, your recommendations for balancing this trifecta.
Yes, and I totally agree with what Eugene just talked about. And my first recommendation is very similar to Eugene's, that we should set a benchmark for all these three metrics. And so we know like how high the cost it is in each metrics, like what's performance for each metrics. And then that can help us to drive the conclusions. And then my second recommendation is after we make a trade-off decision for how to balance these three metrics, we need to visit back the decision periodically, because I personally feel that during different time, the trade-off, the balance should be different. So right now we are in a market that we know that cost optimization is a high priority for many companies. And though it makes sense right now that we will prioritize the cost, and then we will sacrifice velocity and quality in some form. But once we switch to a market that was a fast growing market, similar to whenever COVID just started, and if we have a way to revisit how we make the trade-off decision here, we can probably quickly switch to the balance of that we promote velocity and quality and then sacrifice cost at that time. So I think it's important to keep in mind that we always have a way to revisit the balance of these three metrics. I believe there are a lot of smart people that they know how to balance them well, like good engineers make good trade-off decisions. And just the mechanism of that we can revisit this decision to make sure that it makes sense to the current situation, and also it can make sense for the next 6 months and 1 year to help us predict and then prevent what may going wrong in the market or in the company. I think that will be like a really sustainable way to help us to make a good balanced decision here.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ian. We're kind of closing up on time. I think we'll do 2 more questions and then we'll do a Q&A. Maybe one, we'll see about that. Let's go back with you again, Ian. This time on the security front. Let's talk about kind of more like a different cost avoidance tactic. So security stuff, security operations, which is often called in the dev world, it's called DevSecOps, requires a lot of work. So you would need to have engineers conscious of security to do a lot of manual, or sometimes automating the work, but eventually doing some work in relation to the security aspects of things. So what's your take on shifting left that approach? So getting DevSecOps all the way to the left and prioritizing CVEs, so vulnerability reports basically, as it relates to troubleshooting cost avoidance. So let me kind of reiterate the question. So what's your take on taking the security aspects of things and pushing them all the way to the left? For example, prioritizing CVEs as a measure to cut on costs.
Yep. So I want to talk about my personal experience in privacy, because I think we can apply an analogy here. And I've been working in privacy for Meta for a while, and I see that on the privacy domain, we also try to take the left shifting approach, and which I see it could be working very well. One is from the automation perspective, that we can develop an infrastructure that can automatically detect privacy vulnerabilities in the code base, in our configurations, and then similar to the CVEs in the security domain. But just we do this internally, and that's a prevention for us that before we get reported of all these privacy problems externally. And on the awareness side, the company has been building like the privacy programs to help the engineers to adopt, to bring up the engineers' awareness of what is privacy compliance. And then we also have a program that help to look in the engineers and program managers that in their very early ideation stage, they start to look in the privacy domain expert, like what we call privacy program managers. And so with that early feedback from the privacy program managers, that can help them to develop a feature or external APIs where it's privacy compliant. And I talk about privacy here because I think I see this approach can be applied in security too. And as I look back to how we do this in privacy, I actually see in the tool that I see some of the security have a similar process called security reviews, and which I think that's a good way to bring up the awareness. Automation, we should try to be able to detect security vulnerability on periodical basis and automatically. And then on the human side, provide training to scale the security awareness early so that we can left shift all this security awareness.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we'll move on to our last question, and then I'm seeing there's a couple of Q&A questions. One of them about shift left testing, not really what we're after here today, so I'm going to disregard this one. Sorry, Deepak. And then another question, which I think should be very interesting, about testing costs. Before we do that, let's go to the last questions of the panel, which is geared towards the two of you. So when trying to adopt FinOps practices, do you think there's a cultural or other difference between legacy app architecture and cloud-native modern architecture? Well, let me try and double tap the question there. So when you look at the architecture and the topology of a system, a lot of the time we have what is known as technical debt. So there's things that happen inside the application that have been accumulated over time, need to be fixed, but they are considered debt that need to be repaid. Now, what we're trying to understand is if we're going down the route of adopting FinOps practices, and we're going down the route of allowing people, engineers, to be much more cost aware, and we're making an effort to maintain that cost low while maintaining the speed and quality high. Is there a difference in the topology? Does the architecture matter? Is it difficult or easier on legacy apps? Is it difficult or easier on cloud native apps? Where does this whole discussion take you? And Eugene, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, before working QA, I actually used to support legacy architecture. And look, I get pretty emotional talking about it because my whole being sort of screams is, if you're working on legacy architecture, you need to be working towards demising it, right? Because honestly, like it's great for a while, right? It's because you're working on legacy architecture, chances are you're the only person who knows how it works, right? That you're working on software that is tried and tested over the years, right? That it's yeah, but then you will see that slowly but surely, like that sort of legacy architecture will get chipped away as components are moved out to more strategic cloud-based applications, right? And you will sort of see your job wither away. So look, yeah, culturally, yeah, you will have all sorts of issues, right? You will have trouble finding people who actually want to work on that, right? Because you're working on outdated technology, people are expensive, or just you'll have trouble recruiting folks. So yeah, it's I think in that sense, we need, as far as the culture goes, you need to be at every opportunity sort of communicating up to the top, saying that look, it's a risks keep going up every year, right? And that it's not just a technical debt, it's also security holes that keep opening up, right? And you really need to be working to plugged in to sort of use that knowledge, leverage that knowledge to sort of start developing your solutions.
Thank you very much, Eugene, for that very thorough answer. Yin, regarding your approach, for a company that's well known for a major cloud native approach, I think that you have a very interesting take on this. So what's your opinion on, is there a real difference between legacy and cloud native?
So yeah, I agree with Eugene, like the mindset of the very legacy and versus cloud native, its development is very different. It's not just the tech side, but also the mindset and the culture side. And then what I see, like in the cloud native environment, the users are generally need to be frugal, while the platforms need to be like very efficient. And and I see the big difference compared with the legacy architecture will be, because we need to know who's gonna use the resources in cloud and then how much resource it's gonna consume. And we will be able to see identity and metering everywhere. Identity and metering measurements basically will already be built in the cloud systems. And then whether developing and testing will be easier, more difficult compared with the legacy application. I think it depends on the cloud environment. Like if AWS is so mature today that it would probably just the entry point to and to use AWS should be very simple. I even see a high school student be able to launch a simple service using AWS. But what I see that would be more difficult, it's more debugging. I am personally particularly interested to see if anyone can get to a good solution in the cloud native environment, that when I see a cost increase in the cloud services in the cloud, and can I hunt it down quickly, whether it's from any single lines of config change, or whether it's from the user's behavior change or the traffic change or any network environment. That's something that I haven't been able to see anyone to do it well in terms of automation and tooling in the industry. And whenever I interact with the engineers or the teams owning cloud architectures in Meta, I always throw them this question and say, I want to see something that can shock my mind.
Okay, thank you very much, Yin. I think we'll close the discussion with one of the Q&A question by Deepak Dar. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Dar. So what areas should be focused upon to optimize testing costs other than infrastructure and automation? That's very interesting. So I think what the person asking the question is trying to get at is there's the obvious stuff. If you reduce the amount of servers running testing, it will cost you less. If you automate some of the work instead of doing it manually, it will cost you less. What else can you do around testing specifically to reduce the cost? Ian, let's start with you and then finish with you, Jim.
Yes, this is an interesting question. I think actually improving the test coverage can help to probably reduce the cost. So improving the test coverage, like or maybe on the paper, it looks like we have more tests to run. But I think, like as Eugene also mentioned this earlier, if we have a test coverage improvement, it actually can help us to detect problems early and then reduce the iterations and cycle, the time that we need to take in later QA or CI/CD pipeline, like how often we need to trigger the CI job and CD jobs in terms of diff review and like code review and pushing. And I think that's a good area that we should think about in addition to infrastructures and automations, test coverage.
Thank you, Eugene, your ball.
Yeah, echoing what you said. I mean, when you talk about cost optimization, especially with testing, it's number one priority is eliminating manual testing, right? That tends to be the most expensive part of testing, right? So the more you automate, the better, right? And really, what my contribution to the team is really looking for really taking out all aspects of manual testing that we had done over the years, right? So anything like, for example, our portal, takes security very seriously, right? So we have some telephony that is part of the of authentication flow, right? So what we had done, we've automated the telephony part of testing, right? Visual testing, right? We worked to make sure that we can testing visually, because prior to that it was happening all manually, right? So we have actually managed to bring down the cost in QA by really just automating. It's by far. I think once you automate, then you can sort of work on, okay, well, what if we run things in parallel, but then if the more things you run, you need more resources. Then you can sort of, it's easier to really play around once everything is automated.
Yeah, and I also have an additional comment about that. Now I recall I have one experience. Yeah, when we have a lot of tests in the systems, then the second step is we can also look into how to optimize test performance. And in my time with Meta, I specifically did this for one team where I found the way that they write the test is not that efficient. And then I only add caching for their test, for the test user identity that they need to use. And it drops around hundreds of tests runtime to 10% of the original. But
amazing.
yeah, I just want to talk about that. Yeah, test performance can also be something to improve, but test coverage and the automation is the basic.
Yeah, and I would say something that's very true, and that sort of echoes what I was saying before as well. So Ian, thank you for that. It was actually like, you actually need to take a look at your suite of tests every once in a while and really review, because things become outdated. You don't want to be spending your time testing a feature that has long been demised, right? And really, again, yeah, looking if you have 100 different tests, really all testing the same thing, yeah, then you probably only need one of those.
Okay, so again, just to be mindful of time, I want to first of all thank my participants dearly for attending and kind of listening, coming in on this discussion. I want to mention one thing about cutting costs. So this is the lightrun.com cost cutting playbook. We have a tool that enables you to add telemetry in real time, specifically logs, snapshots, and metrics, which allow you to reduce the cost of your telemetry, which is this hidden thing you don't always seem to notice, but APMs costs rack up, logging costs rack up. We have a tool to help you offload these costs immediately. Thank you again for participating. Thank you for listening. We will be closing the stream now. If you want to share the recording with anyone, please feel free to do so. Before we do so, any last comments, Eugene?
No, I mean, thank you. I mean, just, yeah, QA is your friend.
Ian?
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to attend this event. I'm very glad that I'm here, and I also learned a lot from Eugene. And thank you very much, Tom, for hosting it.
By all means.
Likewise, Ian, thank you.
Always a pleasure to meet new people and talk about exciting, cool things. So that would be the Latin webinar for February. Please stay tuned for March webinar, which will be about another topic. Very cool. And you can follow us on LinkedIn to get all the notifications for the webinars. And again, you can find me at Tom Granat, just like the title says, on LinkedIn and on Twitter. Also on GitHub, but there's no, like, why would you do that? So anyways, thank you very much for joining, and I hope to see you in our next session. Goodbye.